In the depths of human experience, there are moments when the veil of the ordinary thins, and we feel an invisible connection to all that exists, as if timeless knowledge permeates our consciousness. Who among us hasn't experienced a strange sense of recognition in an unfamiliar place, or an inexplicable closeness to someone we've barely met? These mystical experiences seem to point to something more than mere chance. According to a prominent psychologist, all such impressions may be keys to understanding an invisible order that unites humanity as a whole, namely, the collective unconscious. It's like a secret code encrypted in thoughts, dreams, and myths, a universal field of the soul that extends beyond the individual mind. By deciphering this code, we come to realize that we are not isolated beings, but part of a vast, interconnected fabric of existence. The collective unconscious can be imagined as an ocean filled with images, symbols, and archetypes common to all of humanity. The individual consciousness is like a wave on the surface of this ocean, unique but inextricably linked to the water element. Each wave seems separate, but in reality there is no clear boundary between it and the ocean. At this deep level of the psyche, universal patterns are hidden, recurring in the myths, religions, and dreams of all cultures around the world. These archetypal structures are not merely a product of the human mind, but a reflection of a larger order that underlies our existence. When a person gains the ability to discern deep patterns, the world ceases to seem like a chaotic set of disparate phenomena, appearing instead as a coherent, interconnected system. This all-encompassing field of the human soul explains the striking similarity of myths and legends found in cultures that have never come into contact with each other. Stories about gods, heroes, and the creation of the world, the image of the dragon as an embodiment of chaos, found in both Chinese and European traditions, the archetype of the hero embarking on a dangerous journey, all this testifies to the deep connection of all humanity, rooted in a common source. For a long time, science was skeptical of such ideas, but modern research in the fields of neurobiology and quantum physics increasingly confirms that our consciousness is not as isolated as previously thought. As knowledge of the brain and the nature of reality deepens, the concept of the collective unconscious, proposed by Jung, reveals its profound truth. But what does this mean for each of us? It means that our thoughts and emotions are not just individual experiences, but part of a grand flow, that our fears, desires, and hopes concern not only our personal destiny, but also, in a deeper sense, are connected with the destiny of all humanity. A person who understands this code discovers a completely different perception of reality. We are not just separate individuals who happen to be on the planet, but a manifestation of a universal order that goes far beyond our personal existence. And when this understanding comes, absolutely everything changes. In the life of every person, there are moments when it seems as if fate itself is sending certain signs. For example, a book that accidentally falls from a shelf opens to a page with the answer you've been searching for so long. Or an old friend unexpectedly calls at the very moment you thought of them. A chance encounter can radically change the course of life. At first glance, such events can be considered mere coincidences. However, the Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung saw something much deeper in them, defining this concept as synchronicity. Synchronicity is like the voice of the universe reaching us through meaningful coincidences that seem too perfect to be accidental. Jung considered synchronicity as evidence of the existence of a hidden order that influences our lives beyond logical causality. But what is really behind this mysterious principle? Western thinking is traditionally based on cause and effect relationships. But what if there is a deeper connection between events that cannot be explained from the point of view of classical physics? Jung believed that synchronicity is a manifestation of a higher reality, a hidden structure that connects our consciousness with the surrounding world. He described it as an invisible network in which internal states and external events meaningfully coincide. This is not just a mechanical system of action and reaction, but a living, intelligent pattern that permeates our entire life. Ancient thinkers endowed this phenomenon with various names: fate, Tao, divine providence. Carl Jung saw in this a direct indication of the existence of a fundamental universal code. But how to recognize the manifestations of synchronicity in your own life? Often this happens during periods of deep internal change, when the subconscious is actively looking for new horizons. A person striving for transformation suddenly encounters a personality who provides them with the very stimuli they desperately need. An artist yearning for inspiration finds a key idea in a seemingly random exchange of opinions. Someone open to synchronicity begins to realize that life is not just a collection of disparate episodes, but an artfully woven pattern. Coincidences lose their chaotic nature, transforming into messages that testify to the fact that a person's inner path is in harmony with external reality. Modern science is gradually beginning to confirm this concept. Quantum physics demonstrates that particles can be mysteriously connected to each other over vast distances, as if some invisible intelligence is coordinating their actions. Psychological research shows that our consciousness does not simply passively react to external stimuli, but mysteriously interacts with them. It is quite possible that the human mind and the universe are intertwined much more deeply than we previously assumed. Jung was convinced that anyone who can recognize synchronicity begins to understand the language of the universe, and, having comprehended this language, discovers that life is not just a series of random events, it is a dialogue between man and the great whole. Why do myths born in different cultures so often echo each other, presenting similar images and telling the same stories? What makes people, regardless of their ethnic roots and geographical location, have dreams filled with common symbols, ominous shadows, omnipotent deities, winding roads, and radiant heroes? Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychologist and thinker, considered this not a mere coincidence but rather an indication of the existence of a deep order permeating the human psyche and the entire universe. Archetypes, according to Jung, are not just the product of cultural creativity, but universal patterns rooted in the collective unconscious of humanity. They appear as building blocks of our inner world, symbols that guide us on our life path. But if their universality is undeniable, what conclusions can be drawn about the nature of reality itself? Let's imagine the collective unconscious as a hidden matrix, an immaterial network woven from archetypes that are reflected in art, literature, and spiritual practices. The wise old man, the great mother, the cunning trickster, the brave hero. These archetypal figures constantly appear in the myths of different peoples, like a mirror reflecting fundamental aspects of our inner reality. Their appearance is not accidental, but a manifestation of a deep universal code that has been formed in the souls of people for millennia. Jung was convinced that these archetypes are not just psychological phenomena, but an indication of the existence of a grandiose order that manifests itself both in the human psyche and in the structure of the entire universe. The archetype of the hero is a striking example of deeply rooted patterns of human perception. Starting with the ancient epic of Gilgamesh and ending with modern films such as Star Wars, we constantly encounter a narrative about a person embarking on a risky journey, overcoming difficulties, fighting their internal contradictions, and ultimately returning renewed. This is not just a literary device, but a reflection of deep psychological processes, an embodiment of the path of self-realization that everyone must go through. If these behavioral patterns are so common, could it be that their roots go not only into psychology, but also into the very structure of reality? Jung left this question open, but he was convinced that by recognizing the archetypes in our lives, we begin to understand the big picture of which we are a part. We realize that we are not separate individuals, but part of a large-scale cosmic drama that unfolds again and again. Anyone who comprehends archetypes deciphers not only their psyche, but also begins to see the hidden order of the universe, and then life ceases to seem like a random set of events, but becomes a deep journey of the soul, following an ancient universal code. In the public consciousness, the idea of man as the rightful master of his mind, identifying himself with conscious thinking and rational control over his life path, is firmly entrenched. However, In the depths of our psyche lies a much more powerful force, the unconscious. This mysterious ocean, stretching beneath the surface of the mind, holds a treasure trove of memories, instincts, dreams, and hidden truths waiting for their hour. Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, emphasized that our consciousness is just a modest island in this boundless sea of the unconscious. In his view, true enlightenment only comes when we dare to stop suppressing this powerful force and begin to integrate it into our lives. However, this integration is no easy task, but a true journey that requires considerable courage, as it involves facing what causes us the greatest fear. Imagine that your consciousness is just a small candle illuminating a vast dark room. While its light covers only a small area, most of the space remains in shadow, hidden from our eyes. But the unconscious does not disappear just because we do not see it. It continues its activity in secret, influencing our decisions, emotions, and dreams, guiding us in ways that are sometimes imperceptible. Those who avoid encountering this inner darkness risk remaining prisoners of their own fears and insecurities forever, deprived of the opportunity to unlock their true potential. Carl Jung argued that the true goal of personal growth is not to suppress the depths of the unconscious, but to carefully bring its contents to the light of consciousness. Just as bright light allows us to see all the details of a room, expanding consciousness reveals the true picture of our inner self. This process of uniting the conscious and unconscious, known as individuation, is, according to Jung, the true path to self-knowledge. It is the art of harmoniously reconciling the opposites that exist in our psyche: reason and instinct, order and chaos, light and shadow. In many spiritual traditions, this idea is reflected in the symbolic union of opposing principles, yin and yang, sun and moon, heaven and earth. Alchemists called it the sacred union, conjunctio oppositorum, emphasizing its role as the key to deep psychic transformation. A person who has learned to accept their inner contradictions rather than fight them gains a new, higher level of organization within themselves. But what happens when we avoid this integration? In this case, we risk splitting our personality, living only a half-conscious life, subject to the influence of hidden fears and suppressed desires. The world around us begins to seem chaotic and unpredictable, full of inexplicable events and suffering. However, as soon as we begin to explore the depths of our unconscious, our perception undergoes a radical change. We begin to realize that everything that happens to us in the external world is a reflection of our internal state, and that the path to harmony lies not in escaping our own shadows, but in consciously accepting the integrity of ourself. Only by knowing ourselves as a whole can we comprehend the deeper truth that underlies our existence. Deep within each of us lies a hidden realm, a dark mirror of the soul, where repressed anxieties, unfulfilled dreams, and secret aspirations have found refuge. Carl Jung christened this hidden facet the shadow, referring to that part of our psyche that we carefully hide from prying eyes, driven by fear, guilt, or social pressure. However, as we know, what is driven deep does not disappear without a trace. It continues to exist in the depths of our subconscious, subtly influencing our actions and often manifesting itself at the most inappropriate moments. Jung argued that true spiritual harmony is only achievable when we dare to look our shadow in the face, when we consciously accept into ourselves those aspects that we previously rejected. But this path is fraught with risk, as it forces us to confront the darkest sides of our nature. The manifestations of the shadow can be diverse. Sometimes we notice it in our own uncontrollable outbursts of rage or in causeless fears that bind us. In other cases, we meet it in the people around us who arouse in us a dislike for those very traits that we subconsciously fear to discover in ourselves. This mechanism of projection, when we project our suppressed qualities onto others, represents a powerful psychological force. We see our own repressed self in the external world and engage in a struggle with it instead of finding the courage to confront it face to face. The fear of self-knowledge, of confronting one's own shadow, is deeply rooted in human nature. Many prefer to avoid this process, fearing the exposure of their own illusions and the confrontation with the most unsightly aspects of their self. However, it is in this confrontation that the potential for deep personal transformation lies. Various spiritual teachings throughout the ages have emphasized the interconnectedness of light and darkness. In alchemy, the Negredo stage, symbolizing blackness, represents a necessary immersion in the chaos of one's own soul, preceding the achievement of a higher state of being. Mythological heroes such as Jesus, who spent 40 days in the desert, and Buddha, who conquered the demon Mara, faced dark entities that were essentially projections of their own psyche. These narratives emphasize that the real battle takes place not in the external world, but within ourselves, in confrontation with our own shadow. The meaning of these stories is clear. Ignorance of one's dark side makes a person vulnerable to unconscious fears. But the courage to face one's shadow opens the way to deep self-knowledge and understanding of the universe. In everyday life, this means that spiritual growth does not consist of ignoring the dark aspects, but in being willing to accept and integrate them. Healing comes through accepting both the pleasant and unpleasant sides of one's personality. Awareness of one's own shadow allows one to stop fighting it in other people. Accepting hidden desires frees one from their power, and recognizing one's true self in all its fullness leads to harmony that goes beyond accepted moral norms. As Jung argued, the shadow is not only an enemy, but also the key to integrity, and only those who manage to integrate it will find true freedom. In everyone's life, there are moments when they feel an integral part of the universal scale. A gaze directed at the vast expanse of the starry sky can evoke an inexplicable awe, and being in the lap of nature creates a feeling of deep unity with all that exists. And this is not just a figment of the imagination or a fleeting fascination of the mind. The Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung firmly believed that man and the universe are inextricably linked. The human soul is not an entity closed in on itself, but rather a reflection of the entire cosmos. Deep within our inner world lies the same order that reigns in the world of stars, the laws of nature, and the patterns of existence. But how do we realize and feel this connection? Jung argued that our consciousness is formed not only on the basis of personal experience, but also under the influence of something that goes far beyond individual existence. Archetypes inhabiting the collective unconscious are not random products of evolution, but a manifestation of a universal structure that is reflected in everything, from ancient myths to the latest discoveries of quantum physics. Hero, sage, shadow, these archetypal images are found not only in the human psyche, but also in the fundamental principles of the universe. The universe obeys certain rhythms, cycles, and laws that manifest themselves in our internal processes as well. And this is not a mere coincidence. This is evidence of the existence of a deep interrelationship between the human self and the cosmos, a hidden unity that eludes everyday consciousness. The idea of a close relationship between man and the universe is certainly not a new revelation. Many spiritual teachings have for centuries asserted that the individual is a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm of the universe. Ancient Hermeticists formulated this correspondence in the famous principle, as above, so below, as within, so without, emphasizing the inextricable link between different levels of being. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of Atman, the divine spark within each person, indicates his identity with Brahman, the all-encompassing cosmic principle. Mystics of the West, such as Meister Eckhart and Rainer Maria Rilke, also recognize that the human soul is not an isolated entity, but serves as a bridge connecting us to all that exists. Carl Jung, an eminent Swiss psychologist, translated this ancient knowledge into the language of modern psychology. He argued that while our consciousness may be limited by the framework of everyday experience, our unconscious, on the contrary, is limitless and extends to the deepest layers of the universe. But how can we practically experience this unity in our lives? Often this happens in moments of peace, when the mind lets go of its usual boundaries and stops clinging to egoistic notions. Some find this state in meditative practice, in vivid dreams, or in the process of creative self-expression. Others experience this feeling when they deeply immerse themselves in reflection and suddenly realize that their thought is not exclusively their own, but is part of the vast flow of knowledge available to the universe. It seems as if the universe itself speaks through us, using us as an instrument to express its wisdom. Jung was convinced that the more we open ourselves to this comprehensive connection, the more we realize that our life is not just a random sequence of events devoid of meaning. We are not separate observers, alienated from the cosmos. We are the cosmos itself, having taken human form. And once we grasp this fundamental truth, a profound transformation of our entire being occurs, changing our perception of ourselves and the world around us. For centuries, alchemists were obsessed with the idea of the Great Transformation, a magical process capable of turning ordinary metals into gold. However, beneath these chemical experiments lay a deeper truth. True alchemy was never merely an external science, but an internal transformation. It was not so much about changing physical matter as about transforming the soul. Carl Jung, a perceptive explorer of the human psyche, realized that the ancient alchemists, using the language of symbols, were describing processes taking place in the depths of the human mind during its development and the unfolding of its potential. The path to enlightenment is not an easy stroll, but a painful metamorphosis, passing through crises, periods of darkness, and moments of rebirth. However, one who grasps the essence of this process begins to see the universal law of transformation at work in all things. Alchemical teaching describes in detail the various stages of transformation, from the dissolution of old structures to the union of opposites. The first phase, known as nigredo, represents a plunge into darkness, a period of chaos, doubt, and the disintegration of the former self. Everyone faces this phase during a deep crisis, when established beliefs crumble, the ego is shaken, and life loses all meaning. But it is here that true alchemy begins, as new understanding can arise from this darkness. Albedo, the next phase, symbolizes the awakening of a new consciousness, purification, and the attainment of clarity, like the first ray of light after a long night. At this stage, a person begins to integrate their suppressed aspects, acknowledging their true self. However, the transformation is far from complete. The highest stage of alchemical transformation is rubedo, the union of opposites and the achievement of wholeness. This is where the gold that the alchemist sought for so long is born, not as material wealth, but as a symbol of the transformed and perfected self. Jung saw in this process a deep analogy with the path of individuation, of becoming a complete personality. The profound process of individuation, like the journey of the human soul toward the heights of its potential, implies overcoming internal contradictions and harmoniously uniting the conscious and unconscious. The wise alchemists of antiquity understood that true wisdom grows not from fleeing from suffering, but from its deep and conscious understanding. Only one who dares to lose their former self is able to be reborn in a new guise. What is the significance of this alchemical truth for each of us? It opens our eyes to the fact that life crises are not simply tragic accidents, but integral stages on the thorny path of self-discovery. It instructs us that transformation does not happen smoothly and painlessly, but requires passing through the fire of trials, the destruction of old beliefs, the torment of doubts, and finally, triumphant rebirth. At the same time, it instills hope that at the end of this difficult path, we will find a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us, a new existence free from the shackles of fear and illusions. Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, argued that every individual is the alchemist of their own soul. The only question is whether we will have the courage and determination to go through this transforming process to the end, or whether we will retreat in the face of difficulties and remain captive to ignorance and darkness. For the true acquisition of gold, that is, true wisdom and wholeness, takes place not in the external world, but in the depths of our own self. Since time immemorial, from the dawn of civilization, humanity scattered across different parts of the planet, has been absorbed in pondering fundamental questions of existence, about our essence, about the purpose of our existence, and about the true nature of the reality around us. Studying the spiritual heritage of various cultures, one can discover that behind the external diversity of languages, rites, and symbols lies a surprising unity. Like a universal code common to all humanity, it manifests itself in various forms of spiritual traditions, like a trace of a single source of wisdom. Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, came to the conclusion that this similarity is not accidental, but is a reflection of a deep order governing our inner world. Whether we study Western mysticism, Eastern philosophy, or the teachings of indigenous peoples, we invariably encounter the same key principles underlying spiritual development: the pursuit of inner transformation, the awareness of the unity of all things, and the necessity of self-knowledge. But what explains such a striking universality of these patterns? And what lessons can we learn from them for our own lives? The Hindu teaching of Advaita Vedanta asserts that the separation between the individual and the universe is merely an illusion generated by our perception. In reality, every person is Atman, a spark of the divine, a reflection of the infinite Brahman. This idea is also reflected in Buddhism, where the concept of Anatman teaches that our self is merely a construct that must be overcome to achieve enlightenment and be freed from suffering. In the Western mystical tradition, the prominent thinker Meister Eckhart put forward the idea that true comprehension of truth lies not in seeking God in the external world, but in realizing His presence in the depths of our inner self. According to him, the key to this revelation is dissolving the ego, freeing oneself from the shackles of selfhood. Sufis, the mystical seekers of Islam, also adhered to the view of the universe as a reflection of divine unity, where every particle of being carries a glimmer of the absolute. Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, proclaimed the Sufi master al-Hallaj, an assertion that was perceived as blasphemy in his era, but essentially expressed the same idea of unity as Eastern spiritual teachings. The indigenous peoples of the Americas also possessed a deep understanding of the inextricable connection between man and the universe. Shamans of the Andes speak of Pachacuti, an era of great change when obsolete structures collapse, giving way to a deeper harmony. Like the alchemists of the West, they viewed transformation as a natural cycle, birth, death, and rebirth, occurring not only on the physical level, but also in the realm of consciousness. This notion echoes the Taoist principle of change, which asserts that everything in the universe is in constant motion, and true wisdom lies in trusting this flow rather than resisting it. What does all this mean for modern man? These parallels testify to the fact that we are not alone in our quest for knowledge. The great sages and seers of various cultures have come to the same fundamental truths over the centuries, clothing them in different languages, images, and symbols, but the essence of their message remains unchanged. By recognizing recurring patterns and regularities in life, a person comes to understand that his personal experiences and aspirations are not a unique and isolated phenomenon, but an integral part of the universal process. Jung deeply believed in the existence of a spiritual code that permeated all of humanity, and argued that comprehension of this code opens the way to knowing not only one's own essence, but also the secrets of the universe. In the deepest layers of being, the boundaries between East and West, past and future, the inner and outer worlds are erased. Only a single, eternal truth remains, waiting to be discovered in each of us. Often spirituality is perceived as something that manifests only at certain moments or in specially designated places such as temples, churches, or during meditative practices. However, according to Jung, true spirituality is not an abstract theory or a difficult-to-achieve goal, but a life-giving force that permeates every aspect of our daily lives. Spirituality goes beyond religious dogmas and philosophical concepts, becoming a direct experience that transforms our thinking, feelings, and actions. It is like an invisible thread connecting all our actions and guiding us into the depths of our own self. However, What impact does the spiritual dimension have on a person's ordinary life? How can comprehending the universal code about which Jung spoke transform everyday life? In today's world, spirituality is often perceived as something esoteric, existing separately from the pressing realities of work, economics, and social connections. But such a separation is merely a deception of the senses. If a person begins to incorporate the principles underlying his spiritual practices into his daily life, his perception of the world will change dramatically. Mindfulness, achieved in the process of meditation, can have a beneficial effect on his communication with others. Understanding universal interconnectedness can lead to increased empathy and compassion. Awareness of the cyclical nature of being, described by Jung in the concept of individuation, makes it possible to see in inevitable life crises not tragedies but incentives for further personal growth. Jung himself was deeply aware of the significance of this interrelationship between spirituality and everyday life. He argued that a person should strive not only for higher knowledge, but also for this knowledge to bring practical benefits in his everyday life. Spirituality is not just a theory mired in abstract philosophical discussions, but a powerful force contained in the challenges and decisions that a person faces on the path of life. He who applies his spirituality in everyday life realizes that his every action, every thought, and every conversation can have a deeper meaning. It is important not only how a person copes with global spiritual questions, but also how he behaves in the world, how he treats himself and other people. In many unique cultures, spirituality is not seen as static knowledge, but as a continuous process of self-discovery and revelation. It is not a one-time act of comprehending divine truth, but an endless series of revelations that allow us to see new facets of existence and enter into an unending dialogue with life. Spirituality that permeates everyday life teaches us to see the sacred in simple things, in a sincere expression of kindness, in a fleeting moment of silence, in the profound meanings hidden behind everyday events. It encourages constant reflection on oneself and one's actions in order to achieve a deeper understanding of life and one's place in the universe. The influence of spirituality goes far beyond personal experience. When more and more people begin to be guided by the spiritual principle of unity, realizing their inextricable connection with the world around them, relationships between people and social institutions are transformed. Respect for nature, care for one's neighbor, and the pursuit of harmony become not just beautiful ideals, but real principles embodied in daily actions. If each person begins to apply the universal truths discovered by Jung in their life, they will be able to feel a deep connection with themselves and with others. This connection will become a harbinger of a more just and peaceful world, where harmony and mutual understanding reign. For a long time, Western society held a strong belief in an insurmountable gap between scientific knowledge and mystical teachings. Science was seen as a realm of rational and objective knowledge focused on studying the material world, while mysticism was presented as a subjective and spiritual practice dedicated to comprehending the invisible, metaphysical aspects of existence. However, Carl Jung was one of the first to question the validity of this division, seeing in it a deceptive illusion. He was able to discern a common, deep core of truth in both modern science and ancient mystical teachings. Jung argued that science and mysticism are not antagonistic opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin, two different paths leading to the comprehension of the same fundamental truth about the universe. A striking example of this interconnectedness is the development of quantum physics. Discoveries in quantum mechanics, such as the groundbreaking observations of Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, demonstrated that the fundamental nature of matter is much more complex and mysterious than it was presented in classical models. Quantum objects, as it turned out, are not tied to one specific location, but exist in a state of potential possibility, simultaneously being in different points of space and influencing each other over vast distances. This non-local behavior of elementary particles echoes mystical ideas about the unity and interconnectedness of all things, which can be found in many spiritual traditions. Quantum physics, like an echo of ancient mystical teachings, reveals to us a picture of the universe where everything is intertwined with invisible threads, and the seeming separation of man from the surrounding world is just an illusion. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, was deeply touched by these scientific revelations, seeing in them not just a new theory about the nature of matter, but a confirmation of metaphysical concepts rooted in the religious and philosophical traditions of humanity. The idea of a universe permeated by deep and invisible principles eluding direct perception was reflected in Jung's depth psychology and his concept of archetypes. For him, archetypal images were not just cultural phenomena, but pointers to universal truths that permeate both the inner world of man and the external universe. In recent decades, there has been a convergence of science and mysticism, which is reflected in modern physics, especially in string theory. This theory states that the fundamental particles of the universe are not separate, point-like objects, but microscopic strings vibrating in different modes and connected by immaterial bonds. Such a discovery echoes ancient mystical ideas about a hidden, all-pervading unity, about a thread connecting all things in the universe. Outstanding minds, such as David Bohm, recognized as one of the most profound physicists of the 20th century, hypothesized that traditional mechanics provides only a simplified and fragmented view of the universe. In their view, the true essence of reality is much larger and indivisible than modern science can comprehend. Bohm spoke of the existence of a hidden order, an invisible dimension of reality underlying all things, a concept that finds surprising parallels with mystical and spiritual teachings passed down from generation to generation. What does this mean for each of us? It means that the artificial division between scientific knowledge and mystical experience must become a thing of the past. The pursuit of knowledge and the search for truth are not a choice between two mutually exclusive paths, but rather a harmonious union of efforts. It is an attempt to penetrate the fundamental principles governing the universe, both on the material level of quantum physics and on the internal psychic level of mystical comprehension. Science reveals to us how the world functions, while mysticism allows us to approach the understanding of why. One who can unite these two perspectives realizes that the universe is not a soulless mechanical system, but a living, pulsating process that is reflected both in the external and internal world of man. As Jung keenly observed, the true path to understanding the universe lies through the synthesis of these two worlds, through the integration of scientific and mystical approaches. In this union, science appears not as an opponent of mysticism, but as its equal partner, enriching and complementing our understanding of the universe. In concluding his multifaceted philosophical and psychological explorations, Carl Jung turned to one of the most fundamental questions that concern humanity. What is the true essence of the universe, and what place do we occupy in this grand picture? This question drew him not only into the vast expanses of space, but also into the innermost corners of the human soul. Jung came to the conclusion that the answer to this question should not be sought in theories divorced from life or in sterile scientific objectivity. According to him, the real truth lies in experience itself, in the awareness of the inextricable link between man and the universe. We are not isolated individuals lost in a cold and impersonal world, but a manifestation of a single, all-encompassing whole. Jung realized that the comprehension of this profound truth is possible not only on the level of intellect, but also on a much deeper, existential level. The idea of unity is not just a speculative philosophical concept, but a living, transforming awareness that permeates all things. He perceived the universe not as a soulless, mechanical system, but as a living, continuously unfolding pattern that manifests itself both in the external world and in the internal world of the human psyche. This is an order that cannot be grasped within the narrow confines of perception and rational thinking, but can only be understood through direct intuitive experience. The universe, in Jung's words, is a mirror of the soul, and only by learning to read this mirror correctly can we comprehend the truth about ourselves and about life. In light of the above, the inseparability of the universe appears to us not only as a physical reality, but also as a deep psychological and spiritual truth. The seeming separation into I and the surrounding world, into man and nature, into internal experiences and external circumstances, is merely a phantom generated by our egocentric perception. The true reality lies in the awareness of universal integrity, the inextricable interconnectedness of all elements of the universe, in that very synchronicity that Carl Jung wrote about in his works. Synchronicity is not just a random coincidence that has special meaning for us. It is a manifestation of a deep cosmic order that permeates all things and is reflected in every action, in every thought, in every moment of life. The universe is not just the external world that surrounds us. It is an integral part of ourselves, and we are the universe, knowing itself through human experience. The final revelation that Jung came to was that the universe is not governed by some external deity or higher power. On the contrary, we ourselves are part of a continuous creative process, the source of which is our own inner essence. This awareness leads to a deep spiritual understanding that man is endowed with the ability to actively shape his destiny and his connection with the universe. This, of course, places a great responsibility on us, but at the same time grants us boundless freedom. The freedom to be not a passive observer of life, but an active participant in the cosmic dance, a creator of our own reality and a co-creator of the universe. Carl Gustav Jung once remarked that true self-knowledge comes to a person only through reconciliation with his own unconscious and its integration into conscious life. This inner agreement becomes the very key that opens the gate not only to deep knowledge of oneself, but also to a sense of unity with the entire universe. The truth about universal interconnectedness, therefore, ceases to be merely a speculative construct and turns into a spiritual experience that permeates the very depths of human existence. It is about understanding that each individual is inextricably linked to all that exists, that the thoughts, actions, and decisions of each person generate waves that extend far beyond his immediate environment. The universe appears not as something external and alienated, but as a living entity that dwells within each of us and speaks to the world through our actions and experiences. Realizing this unity allows one to reach a higher level of consciousness, encompassing both the external world and the internal cosmos of the unconscious, grasping the deeper aspects of the self. It is this comprehensive awareness that, according to Jung, is the ultimate truth to which a person strives on the path of individuation, and which everyone can discover for themselves in the process of self-knowledge. Since ancient times, alchemists, those sages of antiquity, understood a profound truth. Genuine wisdom grows not from escaping suffering, but from its conscious and meticulous analysis. Individuation, this complex process of self-discovery, is likened to a person's journey to the peaks of their potential, overcoming internal contradictions and uniting the conscious and unconscious. Only those who dare to lose their former selves are capable of being reborn, renewed. But what does this alchemical truth mean for each of us in everyday life? It indicates that moments of crisis are not simply misfortunes that have befallen us, but necessary steps on the path to deep self-knowledge. It teaches that transformation does not happen smoothly and painlessly, but rather through the crucible of trials, through the destruction of old beliefs, doubts, and subsequent rebirth. However, it also opens up the prospect that at the end of this difficult path, a deeper understanding of oneself awaits us, a new existence, free from the fears and illusions that previously constrained us. As Jung said, each person is the alchemist of their own soul, the blacksmith of their happiness. The only question is whether we will have the determination to go through this complex process of self-knowledge, or whether we will retreat before the difficulties and remain in the shadow of our fears. After all, the true acquisition of gold, that inner value, occurs not in the external world, but in the depths of our own self. From the very beginning of its existence, humanity, scattered across different corners of the planet, has been absorbed in contemplating the fundamental questions of being, about the essence of our identity, about the meaning of our presence in this world, and about the true nature of the reality surrounding us. Behind the external diversity of languages, rituals, and symbols inherent in various spiritual traditions lies something common, a universal code that manifests itself in a variety of forms. Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, came to the conclusion that the existence of this code is not a random coincidence, but reflects a deep order underlying the universe. Regardless of whether it is Western mysticism, Eastern philosophy, or the teachings of indigenous peoples, the same fundamental principles are found everywhere: the need for internal transformation, the awareness of the unity of all things, and the importance of self-knowledge. But what explains such a striking universality of these patterns, and what lessons can we learn from them for our own lives? The Hindu teaching of Advaita Vedanta asserts that the separation between the individual and the universe is just an illusion, and that each person in their deepest essence is Atman, a reflection of the infinite Brahman. This idea is also reflected in Buddhism, where the concept of Anatman teaches that our self is nothing more than a construct that must be overcome on the path to enlightenment. In the Western mystical tradition, the eminent thinker Meister Eckhart proclaimed that true understanding of truth lies not in the external search for the divine, but in the awareness of its presence in the depths of our inner world. The path to this revelation lies through the dissolution of one's own ego, the rejection of self. The Sufis, mystical adherents of Islam, also perceived the world around them as a reflection of divine unity, as a mirror in which the universal connection is manifested. Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, exclaimed the Sufi master al-Hallaj, words that in his era were perceived as sacrilege, but in essence expressed the same idea as Eastern spiritual teachings. The indigenous peoples of America also had a deep understanding of the relationship between man and the universe. The shamans of the Andes spoke of Pachacuti, an era of great change, when the old structures collapse, giving way to a deeper harmony. Like the alchemists of the West, they perceived transformation as a natural cycle, birth, death, and rebirth, occurring not only on the physical level, but also in the realm of consciousness. This idea echoes the Taoist principle of change, which states that everything in the universe is in constant motion, in a continuous flow. True wisdom lies in trusting this flow, following it, and not resisting it. What does all this mean for modern man? It shows that in our quest for knowledge we are not alone. The great sages of different cultures throughout history have repeatedly discovered the same truths, clothing them in different languages, images, and symbols, transmitting universal knowledge. Recognizing recurring patterns in life opens your eyes to the fact that personal difficulties are not a unique phenomenon, but part of global development. Jung deeply believed in the existence of a spiritual code that unites humanity and argued that understanding it allows one to comprehend not only oneself but also the mysteries of the universe. In the deeper layers of being, the boundaries between East and West, past and future, inner and outer worlds are erased, leaving only the eternal truth embedded in each of us and requiring constant rediscovery. Often spirituality is perceived as something that manifests only at certain moments or in sacred places, such as temples, churches, or during meditative practices. However, Jung believed that true spirituality is not an abstract theory or an unattainable goal, but a living and active force that permeates all aspects of our daily lives. Spirituality goes beyond religion or philosophy, representing a direct experience that transforms our thoughts, feelings, and actions. It is an invisible connection that unites all our actions and directs us to the knowledge of the depths of our own self. However, what impact does this spiritual component have on our everyday life? How can understanding the universal code which Jung spoke of transform our daily activities? In modern society, spirituality is often perceived as something mystical, detached from pressing realities such as work, economic processes, and social relations. But such a separation is nothing more than a deception of the senses. If we begin to incorporate the fundamental principles of our spiritual practice into everyday life, it will radically change our worldview. The focus achieved in meditation can affect our communication with others. Awareness of universal interconnectedness can lead to increased empathy and compassion. Understanding the cyclical nature of being, described by Jung in the concept of individuation, allows us to perceive inevitable life crises not as tragedies, but as incentives for further development. Jung himself attached great importance to this relationship between spirituality and everyday life. He believed that a person should strive not only to acquire higher knowledge, but also to ensure that this knowledge brings practical benefits in everyday life. Spirituality is not just a theory dissolving into abstract philosophical reasoning, but a powerful force manifesting in the challenges and decisions we face in life. Those who apply their spirituality in everyday life realize that every action, every thought, and every conversation can have a deeper meaning. It is not only about how we deal with global spiritual issues, but also about how we act in the world, how we treat ourselves and others. In indigenous cultures, spirituality is not a static state, but a continuous process of awakening. It is not a one-time revelation, but a constant discovery of new horizons of being, an endless dialogue with life in all its manifestations. Spirituality that permeates everyday life teaches us to see the sacred in simple things, in an act of charity, in a moment of silence, in the deep meanings hidden behind routine. It is a constant reflection on oneself and one's actions, a striving for a deep understanding of life and one's place in the universe. The influence of spirituality is not limited to personal experience. When more and more people realize the unity of all things, when they understand that they are not separated but are part of a larger whole, it transforms relationships between people and social structures. Respect for nature, caring for one's neighbor, striving for harmony become not just beautiful ideals, but real principles embodied in everyday actions. If each person begins to apply the universal truths that Jung wrote about in their life, they will be able to feel a deep connection with themselves and with the world around them. This connection will become the foundation for building a more just and peaceful society. In Western culture, the opinion of an insurmountable gap between scientific knowledge and mystical revelations has long prevailed. Science appeared as a realm of rationality and objectivity, striving to comprehend the material world, while mysticism was perceived as a sphere of subjective experience and spiritual quests, turned to the invisible, metaphysical aspects of being. However, Carl Gustav Jung was one of the first to insightfully discern the illusoriness of this apparent separation. He saw that both modern scientific discoveries and ancient mystical teachings pulsate with a common, deep grain of truth. Science and mysticism are not antagonists, but rather two facets of a single whole, two different paths leading to the comprehension of the fundamental laws of the universe. A striking example of this amazing relationship is the rapid development of quantum physics. Discoveries by eminent scientists like Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr have revealed that the fundamental nature of matter is far more complex and mysterious than classical models suggested. Quantum objects, unlike the familiar objects we know, are not confined to a single specific location, but exist in a state of potentiality, simultaneously existing in multiple possible states. They can interact instantaneously with each other over vast distances, demonstrating the phenomenon of non-locality. This astonishing behavior of particles echoes mystical notions of universal unity and the interconnectedness of all things found in many spiritual traditions. Quantum physics, like an echo of ancient mystical teachings, opens before us a mesmerizing picture of universal interconnectedness, where the familiar separation between man and the surrounding world turns out to be only an illusion. It is no wonder that Carl Jung himself was deeply shaken by these scientific revelations, seeing in them not just a new theory of the universe, but a confirmation of the deep metaphysical ideas that permeate the religious and philosophical traditions of humanity. The idea of a universe permeated by invisible fundamental principles, incomprehensible to ordinary perception, was reflected in Jung's depth psychology and the archetypal symbols he discovered. These archetypes, according to the scientist, were not merely cultural phenomena, but pointers to universal truths existing both in the inner world of man and in the outer universe. In recent decades, there has been a convergence of science and mysticism, which is particularly evident in modern physics, specifically in string theory. According to this theory, the fundamental particles of the universe are not point-like objects, but microscopic strings vibrating in different modes and connected by invisible threads. This discovery echoes ancient mystical notions of a hidden, all-pervading unity, of an invisible connection uniting all things into a single whole. Outstanding minds, such as David Bohm, recognized as one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, expressed the opinion that classical mechanics provides only a superficial and fragmented view of the world. In their view, the true essence of reality is far more comprehensive and holistic than modern science can grasp. Bohm introduced the concept of the implicate order, implying an invisible dimension of reality that underlies all things. This concept finds a striking correspondence in the mystical and spiritual teachings of various traditions. But what does this mean for each of us individually? It means that the gap between the scientific and mystical worldviews must disappear. The pursuit of knowledge and the search for truth is not a choice between two mutually exclusive paths, but rather a joining of forces. It is an attempt to penetrate the deep principles of the universe, both on the material level of quantum physics and on the inner, psychic level of mystical experience. Science reveals to us how the world is arranged, and mysticism explains why it is so. One who is able to unite these two perspectives realizes that the universe is not merely a mechanical system, but a living, dynamic process that is felt both in the external and internal worlds. Carl Jung understood that true comprehension of the universe is possible only through a synthesis of these two worlds, viewing science not as an enemy of mysticism, but as its equal partner, complementing our understanding of reality. In conclusion of his multifaceted philosophical and psychological inquiries, Carl Jung turned to one of the fundamental questions that concern mankind. What is the true essence of the universe, and what place do we occupy in this vast picture? This question turned his gaze not only to the vast expanses of space, but also to the innermost depths of the human soul. Jung became convinced that the answer to this question should not be sought in abstract theoretical constructs or within the framework of strict scientific objectivity. True revelation, in his opinion, lies in the very experience of being, in the awareness of the inextricable connection between the universe and man. We are not isolated individuals lost in a cold and impersonal world, but rather a manifestation of an all-encompassing whole. Jung realized that the comprehension of this deep truth is possible not only through intellectual analysis, but also on a deeper existential level. The idea of unity appears not merely as a speculative philosophical concept, but as a living, transforming awareness that permeates all aspects of existence. He perceived the universe not as a soulless mechanical system, but as a living, continuously unfolding pattern that is reflected both in the external world and in the internal world of the human psyche. This order is beyond limited human perception and reason, and can be comprehended only through direct intuitive experience. According to Jung, the universe is a mirror of the soul, and only by learning to read this mirror correctly can we grasp the truth about ourselves and life as a whole. From this perspective, the inseparability of universal existence appears as a psychological and spiritual axiom. The perception of separation between the observer and the observed, between humanity and the environment, between the inner world and external reality, is merely a phantom generated by an egocentric consciousness. The true reality is an all-encompassing wholeness, a profound interconnectedness, and an astonishing synchronicity meticulously explored by Carl Jung in his works. Synchronicity, as he understood it, goes beyond mere coincidences, attaining the status of a manifestation of a fundamental cosmic order that permeates all things and is reflected in every action, thought, and moment. The universe is not just the world around us, it is an integral part of ourselves, and we are the universe striving for self-knowledge. Jung's final revelation was the realization that the universe is not subject to the will of an external deity or higher power, but is the result of a continuous creative process, the origins of which lie within us. This understanding opens the way to a deep spiritual awareness that humans possess a unique ability to shape their destiny and strengthen their connection with the universe. This entails not only enormous responsibility, but also boundless freedom, the freedom to be not a passive spectator of life, but an active participant in the magnificent cosmic dance. Carl Gustav Jung, a prominent researcher of the human psyche, asserted that genuine self-knowledge is achieved through the harmonization of conscious and unconscious principles. This reconciliation, according to the scientist, paves the way to true knowledge and the experience of universal unity. The profound truth about the unity of the universe, therefore, is not merely an intellectual conclusion, but a spiritual experience that permeates the innermost corners of our soul. The essence is that we are all inextricably linked, and our thoughts, actions, and decisions influence the world beyond our immediate perception. The universe exists not only as something external, but also as a living entity that dwells within us and manifests through us. By comprehending this unity, we attain an elevated state of consciousness that allows us to perceive not only the external world, but also the inner landscape of the unconscious, comprehending our own self. This awareness is the very deep truth that Jung revealed in his works and that each of us can discover on the path of individual development.